For decades, law enforcement arrested men for wearing three-piece patches, running prospect systems, and building criminal brotherhoods. But the same men who spent their careers pursuing outlaw clubs had a passion for riding that had nowhere to go. So they did the only thing that made sense. They built their own. A motorcycle club running parallel to the outlaw world but with a law enforcement twist. They called them Law Enforcement Motorcycle Clubs, or LEMCs. And ironically, they wear the same patches, follow the same hierarchy, and build the same brotherhood as the clubs they spent their careers fighting. These are 8 things you need to know about law enforcement motorcycle clubs. Number 1, they started in 1974 in a small town in Maine. In the spring of 1974, a group of law enforcement officers from the Bangor, Maine area sat down together and made a simple decision. They liked motorcycles, they liked riding, and they wanted to ride together with people who understood what their working lives actually felt like. So they formed a club. There was nothing particularly grand about the moment, just officers from local agencies who shared 2 things in common: a profession that put them in contact with the worst of human behavior on a regular basis, and motorcycles. Among the founding members were officers from the Brewer Police Department, the Sheriff's Office, the Maine State Police, the Game Warden Service, and Probation and Parole. The name Blue Knights was suggested by Dave Coleman, the chief of the Brewer Police Department. The logo was drawn by a local artist named John Bryant, who was not even a member of the club. He simply drew it because someone asked him to. Officers from the Bangor area riding together on weekends, attending events, building the kind of informal brotherhood that forms between people who spend real time together rather than performing friendship at a comfortable distance. But then articles appeared. The Bangor Daily News ran a piece. Road Rider magazine followed. And inquiries started arriving from officers in other states who had read about what was happening in Maine and wanted to know how to start something similar where they lived. The first out-of-state chapter formed in Brockton, Massachusetts, after inquiries from officers Dick DeLesliner and John Dara of the Brockton Police Department. Officers from across Massachusetts began joining that single chapter. Then the chapter grew large enough that it needed to divide. It divided into 2 chapters. Then those divided. By the time the process stabilized, what had started as a single Massachusetts chapter had produced 16 separate chapters across the state. That pattern repeated itself across the country and eventually across the world. The same organic expansion logic that had taken the Hells Angels from a California motorcycle club to an international criminal enterprise in the post-war decades took the Blue Knights from a Maine riding club to a global law enforcement fraternity in roughly the same time frame. But here is what made the Blue Knights expansion fundamentally different from the outlaw expansion it mirrored in shape. At no point in that growth did the organization require its members to demonstrate loyalty through illegal activity. Neither did the expansion produce territorial wars with rival clubs. At no point did law enforcement in any of the 24 countries where chapters eventually formed treat the arrival of a Blue Knights chapter as a threat requiring surveillance and infiltration. The same basic human impulse, find your people, build something together, make it last, produced 2 entirely different kinds of organizations depending on who was doing the building and what they were building it around. Number 2, they are not outlaw clubs. Law enforcement motorcycle clubs exist in direct philosophical opposition to everything the outlaw world represents. Where outlaw clubs built their identity around defiance of law and contempt for authority, law enforcement motorcycle clubs built theirs around the people who enforce it. But here is what makes the LEMC world genuinely interesting. The 2 worlds are not as different in their architecture as you might expect. They both use the same patch structure. They both organize around chapters and hierarchies. They both call their meetings a church. They both have presidents, vice presidents, sergeants at arms, and road captains. They both build a culture around the ride, the colors, and the brotherhood that forms between people who share something that civilians cannot fully understand. The difference is not in the structure. It is in what the structure is pointed at. Number 3, they are bigger than you think. Most people who have never heard of law enforcement motorcycle clubs picture something small. A handful of officers in a single city riding together on weekends. A local club with a website and a charity ride once a year. Something modest and largely invisible against the backdrop of the outlaw motorcycle world that generates international headlines. The numbers tell a completely different story. The Blue Knights alone have grown from that original group of officers in Bangor, Maine, to over 20,000 active members in more than 600 chapters spread across 24 countries. The United States, Canada, Australia, France, England, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Germany, Switzerland, Sweden, Austria, Norway, Mexico. And the list continues to grow annually. The UK and Ireland Conference alone accounts for over 800 members, describing itself as part of a much larger international organization that after more than 40 years is still riding strong. But the Blue Knights are just one organization within a world that is considerably larger than any single club. The Sworn Few, LEMC, operates on a philosophy built around exclusivity rather than scale. They care nothing about being the largest LEMC. Quality takes precedence over quantity. Only the most dedicated will ever wear their colors. Nothing is given and everything is earned. It is a direct philosophical counterpoint to the Blue Knights model, and it has produced a club with its own distinct identity and membership. The Punisher's Law Enforcement Motorcycle Club organizes fundraising events specifically for veterans and families of fallen officers, with chapters operating across the United States and Canada. The Roughnecks MC operates as a non-profit charity-oriented organization for public safety officers, military personnel, and first responders. The MFC, which stands for Military Firefighter and Cops, runs public fundraising events across more than a dozen American states. The Blood Brothers LEMC is open to current, former, and retired officers with powers of arrest from local, state, tribal, military, or federal agencies. The Iron Order has grown into one of the more prominent and controversial LEMCs in the United States. The Black Dogs MC operates as an international police motor club based in the Czech Republic with chapters across Europe. The Gunfighters MC and the Other Guys LEMC add further breadth to a world that most people outside law enforcement have never heard of. Each of these organizations has its own membership requirements, its own charitable focus, its own internal culture, and its own answer to the question of what brotherhood built around law enforcement identity should look like in practice. Together, they represent a global network of organized riders that, in terms of sheer membership and geographic reach, rivals the organizational footprint of several of the outlaw clubs that law enforcement spent decades trying to dismantle. Number 4. Membership is restricted to law enforcement. Walk into a Hells Angels chapter and ask to join. If you survive the conversation, the answer will almost certainly be no. Not because you lack the right motorcycle or the right attitude, but because the Hells Angels have a specific and well-documented rule about who they will and will not accept into their membership. No cops, no lawyers. The boundary is absolute, and it has been maintained across decades and across continents with a consistency that most democratic institutions would envy. The irony is that law enforcement motorcycle clubs operate on an equally absolute version of the same principle, just in the opposite direction. You cannot join the Blue Knights if you are not a current or retired sworn law enforcement officer. Civilian supporters, family members, and admirers of the club are all welcome to cheer from the sidelines. But the patch is not available to them. The membership is restricted to the profession with a specificity that mirrors the exclusivity of the outlaw world it exists in opposition to. Active and retired full-time sworn governmental law enforcement officers who ride motorcycles off-duty. That is the requirement. Everything else is secondary. But the specific definition of law enforcement expands considerably depending on which LEMC you are looking at. The Blue Knights England 11 chapter extends eligibility to police officers, prison service personnel, border force, customs officers, immigration officers, and military police with powers of arrest. The Blood Brothers LEMC accepts current, former, and retired officers from local, state, tribal, military, and federal agencies. as long as they held or hold powers of arrest. The sworn few maintains a stricter position, requiring members to be 100% fully sworn and paid law enforcement officers with absolutely no exceptions. The question of what happens with the prospect period is where the LEMC world diverges most sharply from its outlaw counterpart and most honestly from itself. In the outlaw motorcycle world, the prospect period is the central mechanism through which loyalty is tested and membership is earned. It lasts months or years. It involves demonstrating willingness to do what the club requires, regardless of what that means legally or personally. Courts have treated the prospect system as evidence of criminal conspiracy in prosecutions against outlaw clubs, arguing that the process of earning a patch is itself a process of being inducted into a criminal enterprise. The Blue Knights made a specific and deliberate decision about this. They do not have a prospect period. Their argument is straightforward. A law enforcement officer has already served their probationary period through their career. The years spent proving yourself worthy of the badge, the psychological vetting, the professional accountability, the daily demonstration of the values the club is built around. All of that replaces what the outlaw world tests through a prospect process. You walk in as a member rather than earning your way through a period of demonstrated loyalty to the club specifically. But not every LEMC made the same choice. The sworn few explicitly states that nothing is given and everything is earned, and only the most dedicated will ever wear their colors. That language mirrors outlaw club membership philosophy almost word for word. Several other LEMCs operate hang-around and associate membership categories that function in ways recognizably similar to the prospect systems their members spent careers treating as evidence of criminal organization. The debate within the LEMC world about whether to have a prospect period reveals something important. The clubs that rejected it understood what it looked like from the outside. The clubs that kept it understood what it produced on the inside. Both sides were drawing on the same source of knowledge. Decades of watching what the prospect system did to the organizations that used it. But when it comes to women, LEMCs differ significantly from the outlaw world. Women are full members of the Blue Knights and hold leadership positions both locally and internationally. The England 11 chapter is explicit about this. Women are equal in the organization not only as members but in leadership roles at every level. That stands in direct contrast to a world where women have historically existed on the margins of club life rather than at its center. The motorcycle itself is also not a point of contention. Any make is accepted. No Harley-Davidson requirement, no American bike mandate. You ride what you ride. What is non-negotiable is the badge. You either wore it or you did not. And if you did not, the patch is not available to you. In that respect, the Blue Knights and the Hells Angels understand each other perfectly. They do serious charity work. Year on a Sunday in August, LEMC riders from across the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Europe gather and ride together through the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire in support of COPS, Care of Police Survivors, an organization that provides practical and emotional support to the families of officers killed on duty. The 2026 event will be its 23rd consecutive year. 23 years of the same ride, the same route, the same purpose. That consistency is the most honest measure of what serious charitable commitment looks like. Not a one-off event organized for publicity. 23 consecutive years of showing up. The Blue Knights internationally have contributed over $17 million to charitable causes since records were first kept. Concerns of police survivors, the September 11th Fund, Toys for Tots, Special Olympics, Shriners Burn Centers, Make-A-Wish Foundation. The charitable focus is not random. It is shaped by professional experience. Officers who have responded to calls involving children with serious illnesses understand what a burn center does. Officers who have worked with families of fallen colleagues understand what COPS provides. But here is what separates the charitable activity of the LEMC world from the charitable activity of the outlaw world in a way that matters beyond the obvious legal and ethical differences. The outlaw clubs donate to charity too. The Hells Angels support Toys for Tots. They organize rides. They make contributions that generate positive press coverage and complicate jury perception in criminal trials. The money reaches the same causes, but the context it comes from could not be more different. When a Blue Knights chapter raises money for a fallen officer's family, there is no criminal enterprise running underneath it. No drug network funding the donation, no violence generating the goodwill that the charity ride is designed to protect. The money is clean because the organization it comes from is clean. Beyond the Blue Knights, the Punisher's LEMC fundraises for veterans and fallen officer families across the United States and Canada. The Roughnecks MC operates as a non-profit for public safety officers and first responders. The MFC runs fundraising events across more than a dozen American states. The charitable infrastructure across the entire LEMC world is not symbolic. It is sustained, specific, and built by people who have seen firsthand what the money actually goes toward. The LEMC charitable activity exists alongside nothing of that kind. There is no criminal enterprise underneath it and no strategic calculation behind it. Just officers who have spent careers watching what happens to families when things go wrong, spending their weekends trying to make it slightly better. Same patches as outlaw clubs. For decades, law enforcement treated the three-piece patch as a symbol that required explanation in a courtroom. The top rocker carrying the club name, the center patch carrying the logo, the bottom rocker carrying the territory. That specific combination was used in RICO cases against the Hells Angels and the Bandidos as evidence of organized criminal association. The three-piece patch was the problem. It meant you were one of them. Then the Blue Knights designed their own three-piece patch. Top rocker, center logo, bottom rocker. Nobody arrested them for it. The men wearing it were the same men who had spent years photographing outlaw bikers wearing theirs as part of criminal investigations. The colors differed. The symbolic logic was identical. A visual identity that signals to anyone who knows this world that the wearer belongs to something specific and defined. The bottom rocker created the most complicated conversation. In the outlaw world, it is a territorial claim. Wearing one in territory controlled by an established club without permission has historically produced violence. LEMCs wear bottom rockers. The Roughnecks MC felt the need to put a disclaimer on their website clarifying that their bottom rockers signifies their home state and not territorial control. That disclaimer exists because they understood what the symbol communicated to everyone who saw it. LEMCs reject the outlaw world's authority to govern who can wear patches and claim geographic identity. They did not ask permission to form. They did not submit their designs for approval. They wore their colors and they rode. The patch they once photographed as evidence they now wear as identity. And the men who wore it first have never fully decided what to make of that. There is a specific way that outlaw motorcycle clubs respond to law enforcement motorcycle clubs when they encounter each other at rallies, on roads, and at shared events across the biker world. They laugh, not with fear or hostility, but with the specific amusement of a group watching someone adopt their aesthetic, their structure, and their culture, while explicitly rejecting the values that produced all of it. A source familiar with the dynamic described it directly. They laugh at the Blue Knights, the source said, but afford them respect on the road. That combination of laughter and road respect tells you almost everything you need to know about how the outlaw world processes the existence of LEMCs. The laughter is ideological, the respect is practical, and the gap between the two is where the most interesting tension in this story lives. The Hells Angels have a documented membership rule maintained across decades and continents, with the same consistency they apply to everything else inside their organization. No cops, no lawyers. The boundary is absolute. An organization built around operating outside the law cannot function with members whose professional identity is built around enforcing it. The interests are structurally incompatible at a level that no amount of shared enthusiasm for motorcycles can bridge. LEMCs do not ask permission. They never have. The Blue Knights formed in 1974 without notifying any outlaw club. They expanded across 24 countries without submitting their patch for approval. They wore three-piece patches with bottom rockers in territories controlled by clubs that had spent decades making clear that wearing such patches without permission produced consequences. The road respect that coexists with the laughter reflects a practical recognition that LEMC members occupy a specific and complicated position. They are off-duty officers with no power of arrest in that moment. But they are also not civilians in any meaningful sense. They are men and women who have spent careers in environments that produce a specific kind of toughness. And the outlaw world has always been able to recognize that kind of person when it sees one. The laugh is for the patch. The respect is for the person wearing it. If the Blue Knights represent the law enforcement motorcycle club world at its most straightforward, the Iron Order represents it at its most complicated. Founded in Indiana in 2004, the Iron Order grew quickly into one of the most prominent and most debated LEMCs in the United States. Their membership includes military men, police, officers, and law enforcement personnel. But the Iron Order did something that most other LEMCs carefully avoided. They moved directly and deliberately into outlaw club territory, without the diplomatic positioning that clubs like the Roughnecks MC adopted. No disclaimer on the website about the bottom rocker not claiming territory. No careful language about respecting all colors and expecting the same in return. The Iron Order wore their patch, claimed their identity, and operated in spaces where the outlaw world had always expected deference. The outlaw world responded the way it always responds to clubs that refuse to defer, with violence. On June 26, 2014, at Nippers Beach Grill in Jacksonville Beach, Florida, a confrontation broke out between Iron Order members and members of the Mongols Motorcycle Club. The details of exactly how the confrontation began have been disputed across multiple accounts. What is not disputed is how it ended. An Iron Order member who was also an off-duty law enforcement officer drew his weapon and shot a Mongols member dead. The Iron Order member was not charged. Investigators determined the shooting was in self-defense. The incident sent shockwaves through both the LEMC world and the outlaw world for reasons that went beyond the death itself. It confirmed something that both worlds had been circling around without directly addressing. A law enforcement motorcycle club member, in an off-duty confrontation with an outlaw club member, had used lethal force and walked away without charges because the legal framework that applies to law enforcement use of force applied to him even when he was not on duty and not acting in any official capacity. The patch on his vest was the Iron Order patch. The legal protection that accompanied the outcome was the product of his professional status. The outlaw world had always understood that law enforcement members of LEMCs occupied a legally protected position that ordinary citizens did not. The Jacksonville incident made that understanding concrete in the most direct way possible. Confronting an Iron Order member was not the same as confronting a member of another outlaw club. The calculation was different. The potential consequences were different. The legal aftermath would be different. The Iron Order did not retreat after Jacksonville. They continued operating, continued expanding, and continued occupying the same spaces in the biker world that the incident had made considerably more dangerous for clubs on the other side of the confrontation. But the Jacksonville incident was not the only controversy the Iron Order generated. Within the broader LEMC community, the Iron Order became a subject of significant debate. Other LEMCs, including the Blue Knights, maintained careful positions about how they engaged with the outlaw world. The Iron Order rejected that approach. What the Iron Order ultimately demonstrated was something that the entire history of the LEMC world had been building toward without quite stating directly. The Iron Order showed the outlaw world something it already knew intellectually, but had not yet experienced practically. An LEMC member is never fully off-duty in the ways that matter most. The patch changes. The legal framework does not. And that realization, more than any charity ride or membership requirement or patch configuration, is what permanently changed the relationship between the law enforcement motorcycle club world and the outlaw world that preceded it. But the irony is this: the very officers who spent decades arresting men for exactly that are now doing it themselves. Then they went home, put on their own three-piece patches, claimed their own territory on the bottom rocker, ran their own prospect and hang-around systems in some clubs, built their own hierarchical brotherhoods, and started riding in formation on weekends. The very culture they spent their careers dismantling turned out to be the culture they wanted to belong to. The Hells Angels and the Blue Knights wear different patches and sit on opposite sides of the courtroom, but they both call it brotherhood. They both call their meeting a church. They both have a president, a vice president, a sergeant-at-arms, and a road captain. They both have chapters and mother chapters and international boards. They both have colors they will not let outsiders touch. The outlaw clubs were not flattered. They were not amused. And the tension that produced is the most interesting part of the entire story. But what happens when one man spends decades committing crimes worth 55 years in prison and never serves a single day? Click the next video to find out.